Before we begin, here's how to earn continuing professional education credit for attending this session. Gain valuable insights by attending the podcast, then complete the assessment test to download your certificate. To do this, follow these simple steps. Click on the link in your description to access the session. Create a free account and attend the podcast. After the podcast, take the assessment test and download your certificate. It's easy, and it's free. We highly recommend checking out our subscription. Let's get started.
Well, you mentioned a very interesting term, black box, and I definitely want to talk on that because what you just said about, it's a tension, right? I mean, we want smarter systems, but we don't want to give up everything to get them, right? And you've been always talking about trust in technology. So what does a trustworthy AI really look like in the world of quantum risk and black box algorithms?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So where I want to start with that is think about organizations that have banned the use of certain AI. Maybe it's
Yeah.
yours, maybe it's people in your audience,
Yeah.
but they've said, okay, can't use generative AI.
Yeah.
What I like to do in those situations is let's talk about why you made that choice. I'm not pushing back on it. I'm just saying, why did you choose to ban it?
Right.
And usually it comes down to three things. One is lack of education for
Right.
your workforce on what it is and how you use it.
Yep.
The second is a lack of sufficient testing and stress testing against the algorithm to make sure that it's not going to do something weird.
Right.
And then the third is governance. And
Yes.
as soon as I say governance, there's probably a section of the audience that just fell asleep. And I get it because I understand that is not as cool as, hey, look at our new AI tool. But
Yeah.
governance creates a framework that helps you mitigate risk because
Yeah.
it tells you how your system should be used and under what conditions. And those
Right.
conditions can be audits, every week or every month or whatever it is that you decide. It can categorize risk for you.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of your favorite podcast. We're trying to figure out where we sit down with the thinkers and doers who are shaping the future. Today's guest is one of those rare people who have a front row seat to the future. Nick Reese is the founder of Frontier Foundry and a national security technologist who's advising on some of the most critical topics of our time, from quantum computing to AI ethics and digital privacy. Now, before we get started, if you're watching on LinkedIn or YouTube, drop your questions in the comments. And for those who are looking for CPE credits, visit mycpe.com/podcast or grab the MyCPE One app on the go on your phone. Now, with that, Nick, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Saul. It's wonderful to be here.
Absolutely. Now, let's start with how did we get here, right, Nick? Can you walk us through your journey about how did your career evolve into this fascinating intersection of national security and emerging tech?
Yeah, I'm really happy to, and thanks for the hospitality and having me here. This is a great show, and I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you and your audience. I would say I'm glad to talk through my career progression, though I wouldn't necessarily recommend it because it's been a bit of a windy and bumpy road. But that's okay. I think everybody has a little bit of that. So as you said, I'm the co-founder and the COO of Frontier Foundry. We're a privacy preserving AI company, and how I got kind of the line that I took to get here was not all that straight. So I have a background in the military, so I did some time in the military. Came out of there, worked in the intelligence community for a little while, so I had the opportunity to really work abroad and work with a lot of different technologies. And then from there, I took a position at the Department of Homeland Security here in the U.S., where I was a primary policymaker and policy advisor for various cabinet level departments and the White House. And when I got there, did a lot of really great things. We worked on quantum computing back in 2019, 2020. So it's really been that long.
Wow.
But I ended up departing because I wanted to build something, and that was really the motivation for taking the leap into the startup world, which has been great. Really exciting time to be working in AI, and a really great time to be working in quantum, as I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love that blend of policy, practicality, future vision. It's rare. And now you're leading Frontier Foundry. So tell us about its mission and what's inspired you to create a space that's focused on privacy preserving AI.
Yeah, perfect segue, because it really comes from my background and the background of my co-founder, where I worked in a world where I had access to very, very sensitive information, very sensitive data. So that meant that there were whole sets of tools that were not available to me. And that meant I didn't get the good tools, the good data analytics or things like that. And sort of saw a problem with that. Why is it that the people that have to deal with very sensitive data don't get the good tools?
Yeah.
And when we started thinking about that, that thesis actually extends out really far. It extends into places like law firms. It extends into regulated markets. It extends into financial companies and institutions. And so we built something that could be deployed offline, something that you didn't need the cloud, something where you could run it on a laptop, or you could run it on a server in your office, which we have customers who do. And so we really leaned hard into the privacy preserving nature of AI, really because we felt it shouldn't be the case that there are these artificial barriers of entry in front of you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I completely hear you on that. I mean, this is something that you also hear a lot of people advocating. Don't just feed everything to AI and expect it to, I mean, it will give the results probably. Whether it's helpful or not, that we do not know, but you are probably not cognizant of what you're feeding. It may be business as usual for you and you're accessing that information day in, day out, and you think, oh, this is limited to what I interact on my PC, but you don't know where that is going. You have no control over that. So that's a big problem. And you know your earlier roles, like you mentioned, about working in the military as well as the Department of Homeland, in defense, in government, how has that influenced how you think about innovation and responsibility?
Well, it gives me a perspective that I think not a lot of people have, because we talk a lot about people that are public sector, government people, people that are private sector, and then we talk about academia. We talk about those as three different things.
Yes.
But
Yes.
I had a long career in the government. I'm now in the private sector, and I have a teaching adjunct professor role at New York University as well. And so I have my foot in each of those camps. And what it's done is it's allowed me to be able to look at problems very differently, and speak languages across those lines.
Right.
And it's also given me the opportunity to really look at things through the lens of let's get things done and accomplished. Let's, even if it's small, let's take action and let's make progress toward the goal. And that's because, being in the military, being in the intelligence community, that was a job description. I didn't
Yeah.
really have a choice there. I had to take action. I had to get things done. And so that's the lens that I've approached this company with, and it's been, I think it's created a really good opportunity for us to position ourselves well.
Absolutely. Now, for all those people who are tuning in, a lot of them may not be that much tech enthusiasts. So let's demystify this for our audiences, because
Great.
when we say quantum computing, that can sound a lot like science fiction for a lot of people. So just for everybody's benefit, what is quantum computing and why is it such a big leap?
Well, I'm really glad that you phrased it that way, and I'm glad that you ended on leap, because it gives us the quantum leap, connection here. But I think you said it exactly right, which is that it sounds like science fiction to people. And even when you say the phrase quantum computing, it sounds like something that comes out of a movie. And then when you realize that it isn't, then you have to start really grappling with some really unintuitive and quirky uh, properties that are scientifically valid. They're accurate. They're mathematically proven, but they're different. Those properties are different than the properties that we have in our world. And
Okay.
that's where I think people first start to get a little intimidated, because they think, well, this is so difficult and complicated that there's no way that I can understand it. And there's a lot of terms that are used that make it sound that way. But the place I would want to start with talking about what quantum computing is just different. It's not better, it's not worse than our traditional classical computing. It's different. And it's different in a couple of very important ways, which I'm sure we'll go into, but I think we should just kind of stop at it's different and then we'll move forward from there.
All right. Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, obviously talking about quantum computing could be an episode in itself, but I don't want to take up much of your time. I mean, I recently read this article. I am also alien to the term quantum computing until it started doing rounds. I mean, I read this article of, I think it was an IBM's roadmap that will include creating a 10,000 qubit chip. I don't know what is a qubit. I mean, like a 10,000 qubit chip by 2029. The sound of it just it sounds ambitious, but it does also sound scary. So are we like really close to having quantum systems being able to break encryption, or is that still over the horizon?
Do you want to earn CPE credit? Take this course of MyCPE 1 to earn free credit. Click the link in the description to get started.
So I've been being asked this question for probably 6 years, and everyone that's asked it of me has gotten probably the same frustrating answer, which is that we don't know exactly, but we're one breakthrough away. And let me tell you what I mean by that. So you talked about qubit. Let's talk about what a qubit is and why it's different than a bit. So we know what a bit is inside of a computer, and it's the fundamental unit of information inside your computer. And it's represented by an electric pulse or a lack of an electric pulse, a one and a zero.
And the one. Yes.
The zeros and ones, exactly. So it's physically manifested in your computer that way. And it's happening, millions of times with all the different transistors that are on the chips in your computer. But at core, that function is still happening, the pulse or the lack of the pulse. Yes. And so all these different things come from that, our ability to do computing, our ability to show video, our ability to record podcasts. But there's an inherent limitation in that system, which is that it's still linear. So it's one, then it's zero, then it's zero, then it's one, then it's one. Right. And that linearity creates a limitation that we'll circle back to. But that's a fundamental unit of information in a classical computer. In a quantum computer, the fundamental unit of information is called a qubit or a quantum bit. And a quantum bit, instead of being an electric pulse or a one or a zero, is actually represented by a physical subatomic particle. And the way that particle behaves allows us to do very different things with information, how we manipulate, how we understand information. And so the way I would say it is, it's the difference between deterministic computing and probabilistic computing.
Wow. I said that, qubit sounds sci-fi, and you did mention this, but, as I'm listening to this, I feel like I'm in a science fiction episode, the way you're explaining it. But it does kind of make sense, but it just requires to, from that linear concept to that subatomic particle concept, wherein it's not linear, right? It's something all round, it's not something just like 0 1 0 1 0 1.
Right. It's probabilistic. So I think the best way to talk about this is, if you opened up the calculator on your phone or on your computer right now and you typed in 2 + 2, it's going to equal 4 every single time. Not 99% of the time, not 99.99% of the time, every time. That's determinism. And so another way to explain it is, here's my phone. If I held my phone up like this and I let go of it, do you know what's going to happen?
It's going to fall, but
what? So can you predict the future? Are you clairvoyant? You can predict the future?
No,
of course not, right? But that's determinism. Why do you know that? You know it because there are certain laws and properties, gravity and air pressure and air resistance, that let you know that if I let go of my phone, it's going to fall.
Yeah.
That's determinism.
Right.
Now, in quantum computing, 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4 every time. In fact, sometimes 2 + 2 equals desk. And so 2 plus 2 only equals 4 with a certain probability. Now, there's ways to correct for that, which we can talk
Yes.
about, but
Yeah.
but that's the fundamental difference. There's a probabilistic approach versus a deterministic approach, and there's a
Oh,
lot of things that change in computing when you have probabilistic approach available to you.
correct, correct, correct. So of all the available opportunities to be able to drive that into a way that it drives to a particular result is what quantum computing is about. To be able to identify all those probabilistics and then to structure through it to drive to that result. Hmm?
Yes, that's right. And so that's why I go back to it's different computing. It's not better, it's not worse. It's an entirely different way of computing.
Wow, wow. And now that you mention it, I'm just thinking, what are the industries that you think will really benefit out of it, or probably get disrupted first when this goes mainstream?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the opportunity side of this first because there's so many conversations around quantum start at threat and they end at threat. And so I think it's really great that this is what we're talking about first. So there are a couple of specific industries, but let me give you the kind of the parameters around that.
Yeah.
So a quantum computer is going to be able to run more calculations, more possibilities in a
Yes.
single calculation than otherwise. So imagine maybe you've seen a movie or something where you have astronomers and they're going to run a simulation and they run it all weekend, right? And then they
Yeah.
come back and they see it and they're like, oh, here's our result.
Yeah.
But that's because even with these big supercomputers, there are certain calculations and data sets that we have that we can't do the calculation. It would take a weekend, or it takes years, or it takes decades or more.
Plus, it's all linear, so it's like one after the other,
So
one
it's
after
one
the
at a time, right?
other.
And so that limits us from certain from running analysis on certain very complex tasks. So an example might be if you wanted to analyze a global supply chain.
Right.
So many complexities, so many variables, everything from what's going to happen to a longshoreman strike at the port
Yeah.
to geopolitical situations. I mean, all these things play in. You
Everything.
couldn't run a simulation like that
Yeah.
on a classical computer because of the complexity. A quantum computer would allow you to do it. So
Yeah.
think of complex
Because it is
supply
taking all
chains,
the probabilities into consideration and then it's making the,
yes, all the parameters. So
right.
think supply chain, think
Right.
the creation of new pharmaceuticals,
Right.
think the creation of new materials.
Wow.
Very, very dense, complex, lot of variables kind of problems. Those are the types of industries where we're going to see some impact, but it's not limited to those industries because there are plenty of industries out there that have a lot of data and it's just
Yeah.
growing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this will help with analysis of that data.
I was just thinking of that because with all this macro possibilities of all it could do, I guess what seems difficult today, something as simple as advanced data analytics with all this data that is there. We had big data and now we are doing this statistical analysis of this huge subsets of data. But with again, that is still happening linear. That's why it's difficult and it takes its time. But I guess with the advent of quantum computing, this would allow it to reach its goal quicker
Yeah,
because
well, it would allow, I think the right way to say that is that it would allow us to do calculations that we thought that we just flatly couldn't do,
yeah.
or we're not, or practically we couldn't do. When I say practically, I mean like the calculation would take a million years. And that's not
Yes.
hyperbole, like it would actually take a million years.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
practically speaking, we can't do it.
Yep.
So that's, I think, the way to say that is we're thinking about different types of calculations that weren't possible for us before.
Absolutely. I completely agree to you on that. And I'm glad that we are talking about this. There's just not enough buzz around there. And I'm glad that I stumbled upon you, by luck, by chance, but we spoke and we are here talking. And everybody who is going to be listening into this episode, it's going to be more of like that moment where your third eye opens up and you're like, oh,
Yes, we can see clearly. Yeah,
Yes.
you're right, and that's exactly where we need to be. And I'm glad that I'm glad we stumbled upon each other. It was a connection from first conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Mhm.
All right, now shifting gears,
Yeah,
let's talk about AI and privacy, right?
yeah.
With so many models that are scraping data, how should we be thinking about protecting personal and corporate information?
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now.
So let's. So you have to forgive me here. I told you I'm a professor, so I'm going to back out. I'm going to back out of that question, and then we're going to come in hot. So backing out just a little bit. I mean, let's talk about the way that AI is being built right now. And so let's look, for example, one of the founding principles for OpenAI was that they were going to build artificial general intelligence, which is
Right,
different than artificial intelligence. Artificial general intelligence would be a machine that has the thinking capability, capacity of a human. And
right.
so that's how they are positioning themselves to build AI. And then you have all these other competitors like, Google and Anthropic and Perplexity that have all kind of come, and competed with them in that same way.
Right.
But if our goal is to build AGI, then that means we're building AI in a very specific way. We're
Right.
building AI in a way that we're digitizing, taking all of digitized human knowledge and we're using that as our training
We're
data.
digitizing our thinking, the way we think. Yeah.
Right. We're hooking up our data centers to nuclear power plants and we're
Right.
getting bigger, 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 bigger. And
Right.
there's an assumption in there that I think we should question.
Yeah.
And so the assumption is, do we really believe that there will be an unending demand for the next NVIDIA GPU chip
Mm-hmm.
and an unending demand for just more and more compute? So data centers.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing now, what that framing has created
Mm-hmm.
is a situation where we have to ask ourselves about privacy because there's this artificial barrier of entry and a barrier to entry in front of us,
Right.
which is if I care about privacy, then I'm just going to say, well, I can't use that because the
Yeah.
entire way that we're building, the entire system is not set up for privacy.
Right.
But if there was no demand for privacy, then we wouldn't be asking these questions. There wouldn't be
True.
demands for federal privacy laws. There wouldn't be all these state
Yes.
privacy laws. Just the state of Maryland this year is enacting their newest privacy law. And
Nice.
so that what I'm getting at is that this bigger, bigger, bigger approach is maybe not the approach that we need. The
Mm-hmm.
approach, it might be, I need an AI model that is a specialist, not a generalist. I need it to be trained on my data. I don't
Right.
need it to be trained on all of Reddit or all of X or anything else. I
Mm-hmm.
just need it to be trained on what I need it for.
True.
And so, the kind of simple way to say that is, the future of large language models is not necessarily large.
I guess it's a moving target, right? What seems large today may not be large uh, 10 years down the line. So it's a moving target. That's true. And also, you mentioned that, about, having a model which only works for you. But help me correct this misconception. I thought that, when you use a generative AI agent like Chat GPT, you create something, you type in something, and then you got multiple threads, and each of the thread has got its own logic, and you're training it, and it's responding to it that way. But are you saying that, if it's collecting all that data, and if there's somebody else out there who were to ask something similar to what I asked, it would give the same result to that person as well?
Well, so there's two concepts in what you just said. So the
Yeah.
first one is having a model that's just for you. So that, like I said, that's the difference between a generalist and a specialist. Right now, the big models that are out there on the market are generalists. So it'll write
Right.
you a sonnet. It'll also write you a template for a legal brief. It'll do everything in between. But it's not
Right.
necessarily great at any of those things. I mean, it does
Yes.
it, and sometimes it hallucinates, and
Yes.
and it saves some time, but I mean, it's not 100%. But if what I need is an AI system to review federal appellate court opinions. So I'm basing this on a real case.
Yes.
Then what I need is a model that specifically is trained and tuned
To understand that.
to
Right.
analyze that data and then respond with responses and templates and opinions and things like that that I might need. Now
Right.
that still does not absolve the human from
Yes.
checking and being responsible,
Yes.
but it is possible to fine tune a model in such a way that it is a specialist and not a generalist. So that's kind of the way that that we've approached looking at AI systems and building systems for people that not only want privacy, but they also want more accuracy. Now, the second thing you said, you talked about determinism. So you said if you type in something, does somebody else type in the exact same thing and get the same result?
Yes.
So this is where, this is the world we had to live in when we had customers in the financial sector, because they have regulators, and regulators come to you and say, why did you make this trade? And you can't say, well, the black box said so. So, that's what we did. Like, you have to show your work. You have to show why you made that choice. And
Yeah.
so building more deterministic AI is also a really interesting pursuit that, again, we're not on the big scales. We're not really going after that with some of these larger companies, but there are smaller companies that are working on this exact issue.
Well, you mentioned a very interesting term, black box, and I definitely want to talk on that, because what you just said about, it's a tension, right? I mean, we want smarter systems, but we don't want to give up everything to get them, right? And you've been always talking about trust in technology. So what does a trustworthy AI really look like in the world of quantum risk and black box algorithms?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So where I want to start with that is think about organizations that have banned the use of certain AI. Maybe it's
Yeah.
yours, maybe it's people in your audience,
Yeah.
but they've said, okay, can't use generative AI.
Yeah.
What I like to do in those situations is let's talk about why you made that choice. I'm not pushing back on it. I'm just saying, why did you choose to ban it?
Right.
And usually it comes down to three things. One is lack of education for your
Right.
workforce on what it is and how you use it.
Yep.
The second is a lack of sufficient testing and stress testing against the algorithm to make sure that it's not going to do something weird.
Right.
And then the third is governance. And
Yes.
as soon as I say governance, there's probably a section of the audience that just fell asleep.
Yeah.
And I get it, because I understand that is not as cool as, hey, look at our new AI tool. But
Yeah.
governance creates a framework that helps you mitigate risk, because
Yeah.
it tells you how your system should be used and under what conditions. And those
Right.
conditions can be audits, every week or every month or whatever it is that you decide. It
Mhm.
can categorize risk for you. All of those things are really important, and a lot of organizations don't do the governance work first, and
Mhm.
their implementations suffer. And so
Yeah.
I would personally, if it was me, I would personally recommend that the way people go about this is you should do some education first.
Right.
In parallel, you should be building your governance framework.
Right.
Then you should be deploying your system. And that's
Interesting.
the way, if you do that, that's how you not only mitigate future risk, but it's also how you ensure that the investment you're making is going to return value.
But now that you mention about governance, I'm just thinking about all the tools that I've used till now, or anybody who's listening into this. I'm sure a lot of us are using. There will seldomly be a person left who is not using any form of an AI tool today, in the times that we are today. But governance is something that we don't really even think about, or even take it into consideration. Sure, it's like, okay, the logs are there, you can look into it, but nobody really goes through that governance part initially. And I mean, like, so do you think that we're doing enough? I mean, at a product level or at a government level to prepare for these issues?
I think that there are kind of discrete pockets of people in the government, in the private sector, and in academia who are absolutely looking at this issue and looking at ways to make this issue work for people, especially on the governance side. But
Yep.
here's where we get a little sideways on governance.
Mm-hmm.
We have a governance model for IT equipment, right? So
Yes.
phones and laptops and things like that. And so if you work at a particular organization and your organization is procuring laptops, somewhere there is a list of specifications that
Yes.
laptop has to meet.
Yes.
And if it meets those specifications, then what's the question we ask? The question is, can we use this laptop? And then we
Right.
say yes, right? It meets all the specifications. We say yes. Can we use? That's important.
Yes.
But in AI systems, that's the wrong question. The question in AI systems should be, should I? Not can I?
Yes.
And so here's where that gets really interesting. So if I go through an IT procurement and I say, yep, this laptop will work, and away it goes. Then we start talking about AI systems and we say, all right, just put the AI system into the IT governance process.
Right.
And we fail. You can't put AI into an IT procurement process because that's not how AI works.
True.
And so this is where we have to do some hard work. And the hard work is you can't just plug it into the existing model. You're going to have to make your own. And here's where this gets even a little harder than that. I can't just hand you a governance model that you can just implement.
Yeah.
Because that governance model depends heavily on your organization, what you're doing, how you classify risk, all of those things. So for one company, what might be a super high risk could be a low risk for a much larger company.
True.
So when we're doing governance for AI, we have to remember it's not can I, it's should I, and if yes, under what conditions.
Very thought provoking, very, very thought provoking, Nick. I'm glad you brought that out, and, I mean, there's so much that we can talk on it. And I am pretty certain that everybody who's listening into this podcast, they're going to be pausing a lot of times throughout the podcast to give it a pause and think about what just happened. There's a beautiful journey that's going to happen mentally as well as to where they are today. So thank you for bringing that out. It's not
Well,
canon.
yeah, I appreciate that, and I hope that listeners are do think that way, because I convince myself that that's what my students do. They, after class, they think, but I don't know if that's true or not.
No, they do. I'm sure they do. Look, it's a reaction. I'm not just a host, right? I'm also the one listening into. And if I'm getting those reactions, I'm pretty certain everybody else who is listening into it will be getting those as well, because they some more or less also come with that same thought process. I don't know quantum computing. It's only through this podcast did I come to know what is quantum computing, or try to make a little bit sense of what it means. And from whatever limited that I've come to know, I'm already thinking, whoa. And you already talked about deterministic and probabilistic things. And now I'm thinking that, if quantum computing was there, we will be able to probably build trustworthy AIs, which are more uh, specific. They're able to take into all the probabilities into consideration and able to deliver a system that is perfectly built for your business. But for that, we need to reach that level of quantum computing.
Yeah, and what the future of quantum computing holds is going to be a question, and when we get to that capacity, that sufficient capacity to be able to do these complex calculations, there's going to be all sorts of things that open up for us. But I think that before we get there, I think we need to do the three things that I mentioned, which is we need to educate ourselves, we need to educate our workforces, and I'm not saying go get a master's degree, I'm not saying go get a PhD, I'm saying spend 4 days, 4 weeks, something like that, doing a course so that you understand what is a neural network, what is a generative adversarial network, why does that matter. So do that. Start creating a demand for secure testing. We should be testing these things.
Right.
And then also you should be thinking about your governance structure.
Governance.
And governance is something that you're going to need to find somebody that knows about this, because it's not like other governance. And so again, it's a little bit of the hard work, but if you do the hard work up front, your AI gets out of proof of concept and actually gets into the hands of your users and customers. And that's what you
Yes.
want. That's what
Yep.
you
Yep.
invested in.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So this is very interesting, and now I want to just like zoom out from this conversation from an individual user level to a national stage, right? You had your hand in defense strategy. So, how should governments be preparing for AI and quantum-based threats?
Yeah, I think there's actually a little bit of good news to tell here. So, the government has been working on especially the quantum cryptography issue since
Mm-hmm.
about 2015. So, the National Institute of Standards and Technology within the Department of Commerce actually
Mm-hmm.
started a competition to figure out what actual algorithms, cryptographic algorithms, could we use to be quantum proof. And that began in 2015, and they actually finalized them last year in August of last year. And so this has been being worked on for a while. When
Mm-hmm.
I worked at Department of Homeland Security, we actually released a post-quantum cryptography roadmap for
Mm-hmm.
industry
Mm-hmm.
in 2021.
Mm-hmm.
So this has been something that has been moving for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And then on the AI front, I mean, the government has done a lot of work on thinking about AI risk and about thinking about AI governance, and
Yes.
some of that stuff hasn't quite trickled out into private sector just yet. But I think the government has done some initial work, but
Yep.
there's always going to be some room for improvement. And so I would say, in terms of improvement, I think there's always going to be ways that we can be a little better, a little more efficient on procurement, and how we think about bringing AI into specific mission areas,
Yeah.
um, and not centralizing our AI in any one place, because that presents a security issue.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, now there's always a lag between innovation in the private sector and the response from the public sector, right? So, and I see there's like an innovation gap, so, or is there one? Is there an innovation gap? And if there is, then
Well,
how do we close it?
so I think yes, but I would say it a little differently. So I think the way that I would talk about the gap is, the private sector can turns out new technologies, new innovations. The government tends to lag in adoption because there are a lot more rules around what they do. So they have
Yeah.
to be able to, figure out a way that it fits into a procurement process. They need to figure out a governance structure. They need to figure out data sharing, because some of the data they have, they're not allowed to share by law. And
Yes.
so it's not just a simple, like, all right, deploy it kind of question, like it might be for a private company.
Yeah.
So there is a lag, but I think that lag is a result of um, additional kind of risk analysis, governance analysis, and things like that, which I think, given especially some of the mission areas we're talking about, is absolutely appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do digital sovereignty and AI regulation come into play when we talk about international power balances?
Yeah, so you have really different ways of thinking about, especially data and data privacy, and you can kind of put it in three categories. And so you kind of have the model that's, I would say, kind of focused on China, or the kind of the way that China does things, which is that the state owns your data, right? You don't own your data, the state owns your data.
Oh,
And
really?
then,
Right.
yeah, and then in the European Union, you own your data. But in the
Yeah.
US,
Hmm.
companies own your data, right? So we've got kind of these three very, very different approaches. And so, you have things like GDPR in the EU. You have the EU AI Act, which are
Yeah.
these kind of preemptive regulatory actions that are very different than certainly how the US approaches this.
Right.
But I think ultimately, you know, there's always been a thought that the power that's going to dominate AI is going to be the one that has the most data available. And
Mm-hmm.
if you measure it by that, then if the state owns your data, then that would mean that you would that would be the most powerful. The company owning your data would be second, and the individual owning their own data would be third.
Will be third.
But
Right.
that's not necessarily true now. I mean, maybe in the long term it ends up being true, but
Yeah.
It's not necessarily true now because we are getting better, I would say more computationally efficient
Yes.
in how we train and how we refine our algorithms, how we tune our algorithms. So it's not necessarily the case that these digital sovereignty and especially data privacy issues are going to be at the forefront. But I mean, that also depends on how we innovate in the meantime.
Brilliant. Well, all right. Now let's just bring this home for the business leaders who are listening into this, right?
Perfect.
So, if I was a CFO or a CTO, right, what are the top things that I should be watching for when it comes to quantum and AI?
Yeah. So quantum, I think two things you need to be doing right now. One, educating your workforce. You have to make sure that people understand what this is. That includes you as the CFO. The second thing is you need to be planning for the transition to post-quantum cryptography. And there's resources available on that. The piece that my team produced is available at dhs.gov/quantum. You can see it there. It's a really pretty infographic. And it tells you exactly what you should be doing in terms of getting ready to transition your cryptography to keep yourself safe. So I think those two are the immediate things. And then longer term, I would start thinking about replacing, if you're replacing some of your legacy hardware, see if, consider budgeting in for cryptographic agility, because this is not the only time we're ever going to have to change cryptographic algorithms. And the faster you can do it, the better off you're going to be. And then third, start thinking about the opportunities. Is there some function in your business, some complex problem in your business that you might be able to solve with something like this? It's not going to be tomorrow, but that gives you enough time to plan. So really think about those things and think about how they might affect you.
No, absolutely. And I mean, like one of the biggest assumptions I hear whenever something like this is that we are discussing is being talked about is like, oh, we've got time. But acceleration doesn't really wait for a consensus, right? So, what's that one belief about the future of tech you think most people are dead wrong about?
Well, I'm going to stick with the quantum subject. So a lot of people say, well, if you can't tell me when it's coming, I already have cybersecurity issues I have to worry about. And, some people even say, well, it's not coming at all.
Yeah.
And hey, maybe we'll be on this podcast again 5 or 10 years from now, and it turns out that it never happened. And if that's the case, then I promise your audience right now that I will admit that I'm wrong. But we know it's going to work. It's just an engineering problem at this point. Now, how long it takes us to get there is not known. That's why I come back to it. We're one breakthrough away. If we get that breakthrough and it pushes us forward and accelerates that timeline, this will be the most important cybersecurity challenge that we face in our lifetimes.
True.
And if you're a business leader, my question to you would be, are you willing to bet your company's future on that? Because if this really happens, then you don't have a workforce that's prepared. You didn't protect your most sensitive data. You didn't consider the opportunities. Not only will you, lose out on potential business and opportunities because other companies will be ahead of you, but you're at a heightened security risk.
True.
So to me, that is something that a lot of people are very wrong on, because they're looking at this in terms of, well, if it's not in the next year or 2 years, then I don't need to worry. But I would actually argue, and I think there's a good argument, that we're already a little behind.
Yeah. True. Well, Nick, before I let you go, I have got some few rapid fire questions. All right.
Great.
It's like no pressure. Just give us your quick take. All right.
Love
So 5 questions. First question, most overhyped buzzword in tech right now.
Enterprise AI.
All right. Okay. We're not going to talk on it. I just want your responses. So we're going to have that. Second question, an emerging tech that doesn't have enough attention.
I would say quantum.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Now that I know what it is, I would definitely say it's quantum. Definitely. I know this could be a little bit tricky. One movie or book that's got AI or quantum surprisingly right.
Hmm. Well, I don't think there's one that has quantum, surprisingly, right? At least not
Yeah,
yet. But maybe that's something you and I can take offline and we can submit a screenplay.
yeah,
I would say, oh boy. Wait, that is a really good question. I'm not as up on a lot of these movies because I think maybe when there's a world you work in, it's hard to watch the fictionalization of those. That's why I don't watch
yeah.
movies about the Navy because I was in
Mm-hmm.
the Navy. Um, so yeah,
All right.
I might not be I might not have a great answer for that one.
Okay, no problem. No problem. All right. One big misconception about AI safety.
That we can achieve it under the current design model or design structure and under the
Okay.
current testing regimes.
All right. And before I let you go, what keeps you up at night and what gives you hope?
Hmm. Um, well, so we'll start with hope because this is a family show. So, I would say what gives me hope is seeing people and working with entrepreneurs and working with even government officials, people in academia, students, things like that, who don't just accept where we are in terms of emerging technology. They don't just accept certain vulnerabilities or just accept certain ways of doing things. And I think that's exactly what we need, and that's
Mhm.
why we've been successful in innovating up to now. So
True.
the personnel side of that makes me really
Hmm.
happy. And as a COO, I see a lot of different engineers and things like that. And just really happy, especially about the younger folks coming up. And then I think in terms of what keeps me up, I think it is that there are threats or vulnerabilities that we don't take seriously enough. And we already touched on this, and I wish I had something more creative for you, but I think this covers the quantum threat. It also covers AI safety. It covers cybersecurity vulnerabilities. It covers outer space. I mean, there's a lot of different places this goes. And you just saw last over the weekend, 16 billion passwords were stolen.
Whoa.
Yeah, Cyber News broke a story there. They found 30 different databases with 16 billion passwords in it. And if you break that down, that's 2.8 passwords per human that has access to the internet. So, we look at things like that and we just kind of accept that, like, oh, got to change your password. No, let's think differently about it.
Yeah.
Let's start to take this seriously and let's think about it. And there's a lot of ways that we can talk about that.
Absolutely. Well, Nick, this was packed with insight. You helped us not just understand the future, but also think about how to shape it with intention, right? So thank you so much, Nick, for joining us and being a guest to this podcast and sharing your insights. It's been a masterclass. And to all our listeners, do check out Frontier Foundry for knowing more about Nick's work. I'll be sharing that in the show notes so you will have an access to it. And as always, do visit mycpe.com/podcast for CP credits. Follow WTF with Saul when you listen to the podcast. So, with that, I would bring a wrap to today's episode. So, until next time, take care, stay curious, stay skeptical, and keep innovating in everything that you do. Cheers.
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now